We have this guy on a lot. We cannot have him on enough. He's doing some of the most important journalism you will find anywhere. He's one of the best investigative reporters in the world, and his reporting on Harvey Weinstein won him the Pulitzer Prize. He's the one who produced the first detailed account of payments and the National Enquirer. His book, his podcast, Catch and Kill, have been at the center of explaining to you how some of this stuff happens. Ronan, thank you for making time. I know you're very busy. The indictment, I don't know how much of your reporting is in the indictment, but it seems like a great deal of it. So I've got a lot of questions, and I'll get to as many of them as quickly as I can. Which of the people involved, Dorman, Karen McDougal, any of the reporting, Stormy Daniels, which of the ones do you think is the most damaging?
Well, first of all, it's always great to be on, Dan, and you know, it's a welcoming place here. That's not true across all of the media, and you always want to have a thoughtful conversation, so I appreciate that. You know, second of all, a lot of reporters did a lot of great work over the years, not just me, on these hush payments around Donald Trump. At least one that got punted to his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. That's the payment to Stormy Daniels that a lot of listeners might be familiar with from that being all over the news. That's part of this indictment. A big chunk of the charges are specifically related to Donald Trump reimbursing Michael Cohen for that hush payment and covering up those expenses. But then, as you point out, there are these other characters that enter into this indictment, including some from stories that I worked on. You mentioned the doorman at Trump Tower who came into knowledge of a supposed rumored Trump love child, that he had an affair that resulted in him fathering a young woman who's now around my age. We never uncovered verification about the paternity question. I, of all people, had no desire to dig into the underlying kind of family drama questions, paternity questions, and didn't consider those news. But I did believe at the time, and still do, that the transaction, the payment, which was made through the National Enquirer, through AMI, to that doorman to buy his silence, it gave him $1 million penalty if he ever breathed a word about it. That was real. So whether the underlying rumor was or not, we documented, and I looked at the contracts associated with this election season payment. We now know that that payment came on the heels of a meeting between Donald Trump and the people at AMI, the parent company of the National Enquirer, in which a deal was struck where there'd be this scheme that the Enquirer would go out and find unflattering stories. David Pecker, it says in this indictment from this week, volunteered to be the eyes and ears of the campaign to look out for that kind of damaging information, and then that they would buy it and sit on it, this practice known as catch and kill in the tabloid world. So that's right at the center of the statement of facts that was released by prosecutors in Manhattan this week. And then an additional story I worked on about a payment that happened several months after that. This is, again, all relatively late in the election cycle, the last time around. This payment was from AMI, the National Enquirer, to Karen McDougal, this former Playboy model who had an affair with Trump. She says he's sort of intermittently denied that over the years, but it seems pretty clear that it's true that he did. And here again, who cares on the underlying affair? That's obviously personally significant to Melania Trump and perhaps others in the family, but not significant to me as a reporter. However, I really felt strongly at the time that because of the proximity to the election and the fact that even before all of these players around Trump were kind of forced to admit to this, they ultimately signed a non-prosecution agreement with federal prosecutors, where in exchange for being let off the hook, they said, yeah, this all happened. And even prior to that, I was very aware that these payments were significant, were news, and were of questionable legality. So it's interesting, but not terribly surprising, to see them now figure in direct charges against Trump. And yes, to your question, a lot of it is territory that I reported on.
And most damaging, in your view?
Well, I'd put this in the broader context. A lot of your listeners might have heard this kind of analysis. there are questions about the viability of this case in Manhattan. You know, it's not the most serious of the charges looming against Donald Trump. Certainly, I believe it's newsworthy that there was an elaborate scheme to conceal stories and then in turn conceal the trail of money behind all of this. And you know, I feel the reporting has held up very well. You know, the fact that it's a basis for these criminal charges is, I think, a testament to that. That said, if you look at the charges related to, you know, potential election rigging in Georgia, the potential charges that may emerge around the January 6th probe, there are obviously other cases against Donald Trump which might result in much more serious penalties. This case in New York, you know, rather than comparing which of these transactions around the hush money schemes in the election season is the most significant, they're all going to be significant because even though they're charging on some of these Stormy Daniels repayments, because that's a concrete business accounting problem that he, you know, mislabeled his repayments to Michael Cohen essentially. They're going to have to bring in evidence of all of these payments, the entire scheme with the National Enquirer, because they need that to bolster their case. They need that to establish, yeah, it was a scheme to defraud voters and not just to protect him personally. So, you know, those are all going to interlock and be of kind of symbiotic importance within this case. But I think the way I'd answer your question is to say, relative to the other cases that are out there and that may soon come to a head about Donald Trump, we're not looking at the most serious of the charges here. You know, the business accounting charges, there's 35 of them. They're misdemeanors typically. The prosecutors in New York are seeking to elevate those into felony charges by saying, hey, yeah, they're typically misdemeanors, but in this case, the statute allows us to charge as a felony because all of these people were working together to misrepresent the expenses in the interest of committing another crime. And in this case, that's going to be, we don't know exactly which statutes they're relying on, but something in the area of violating election law on either a federal or state basis. All of this, even if they prevail in that somewhat novel kind of bootstrapped legal argument, it only carries 3-4 years prison time as a maximum penalty. I'd be absolutely shocked, even if they do prevail, if they got anywhere near that on the sentencing side. And again, them prevailing is certainly a big question mark. So yeah, so I think, you know, people who are watching the news cycle around Trump, which I appreciate, some people may be fed up and done with it by now, but you're going to be seeing a lot more of him, and in the context of a number of these cases.
Ronan, you sat down with both the doorman, Dino Sajidin, and Karen McDougal. What was the most surprising thing you learned in speaking to them?
You know, the thing that was apparent from the beginning was that this was a larger pattern with Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has a system of deception around him. And one of the things that I was struck by in my interviews, and both of these are probably best represented. I mean, you can go back to the original New Yorker reporting I did, but also I then did deep dive interviews with all of the people you're talking about in the Catch and Kill podcast. So if you go on your podcast app and you look at the, I think it's the 8th and 9th episodes of that series, one is Karen McDougal's story and one is the doorman story. And it kind of walks you through this entire scheme around Donald Trump. So the fact that this was not just a one-off here, a one-off there, this was sort of a window into his practices and a lot of deception around him that was much larger and more systemic was apparent to me from the start. And I was struck by the doorman, Dino Sajidin, saying to me he had grown up on the streets of Brooklyn in a slightly different time when kind of mob connections and mob violence and mob grease payments were all much more prominent and out in the open. He's in his early 50s now. And he was remarking how in Trump Tower, he saw a lot of those same traits that this guy who's the COO rather, of the Trump organization at the time, Matthew Calamari, that's really his name, was this kind of like hulking, muscle-bound giant figure, and he'd do this kind of Goodfellas thing of like staring you in the eye and grabbing your hand and squeezing it really hard and continuing to shake until you really like admitted what he wanted or said like, yes, I get it. And he described some of these meetings where, the blinds would be shut and he'd be in like a dim office and they'd be like, you need to drop this rumor. You're like family to us, but you got to drop it or all that's going to change. This is all according to Sajudin's account. So, you can buy it or not, but it accords with a lot of the accounts that I've heard from a lot of people around the Trump organization, which is there was a kind of thuggish, like grease the palms, and if that doesn't work, intimidate someone leadership in that company. And I think we saw a lot of the consequences of putting that in the White House over the course of Trump's presidency. And that's at the heart of all this, right? Like the fact that he's the first president to be criminally charged in this way, and that there are so many pending cases against him does show us that, if you put someone where there's evidence of kind of systemic disregard for the rule of law in that position, you're going to have years of legal fallout.
Juju, put it on the poll, please, at LeBatard Show. Do you believe the guy's actual name is Michael Calamari?
Matthew.
Yeah.
Matthew
Calamari. My
Matthew
bad.
Calamari.
That's the part I got wrong.
Yeah.
My bad.
He reached for the sunglass case again as a mouse.
Now that we're
Just
here.
start using it as a mouse. Like willpower is going to just turn it into one.
Ronan,
Yeah, I mean, it's this whole story is so chock-a-block with characters that seem, if they were in fiction, they'd be overwritten. But no, he's a real dude, and has not wanted to comment on this stuff, understandably.
Ronan, what do you say to people who say minor crimes, witch hunt?
I think a lot of that is kind of fair on some level, right? Because they are minor crimes in this particular case. And yeah, I think that the DA in Manhattan is according itself with considerable professionalism and like taking every step to not lean into the political circus element of it. And they do indeed charge these kinds of, tax and accounting fraud crimes all the time. So although there are some ways in which the case is extraordinary, there are also ways within the case in which it functions kind of as business as usual for prosecutors. That said, to this point about witch hunt, I mean, that's an old political tactic. That's a line that Donald Trump throws around a lot. If what you take witch hunt to mean is like this is a kind of an unusual concerted effort to duct tape together minor charges to bring a case against Donald Trump, I think that's like a fair legal analysis. I think that's a pretty rational position one can have. They're going very hard on a scheme that without a doubt was ethically questionable, was bad for voters, was deceptive, that I think was probably illegal, but that is all told in terms of what you can actually make stick. I mean, this is just me putting my lawyer hat on, fairly small ball. So again, I think we'll all be watching some of these other cases from other prosecutors and seeing how they evolve as well.
Juju, bring us home.
yes, sir. Ronan, I always enjoy your segments, brother. You're so informative and so well-spoken.
thanks, man.
My goodness. One question, though. Your skin is literally glowing off the screen, and your hair is phenomenal. Can you share any tips,
Yeah,
brother? Because
radiant.
my face is
Happy
not
you
the
said
same.
that. I tried to run to the gym between meetings, and then I didn't have time to shower. So what you're seeing here is just sweat.
Wow.
It's just
A natural glow.
Radiant.
Glistening.
You are radiant. It is the radiance of excellence. Thank you, Ronan.
guys
Always
are so
appreciate
kind.
your time. See you later, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Ronan.
good to be here. Have fun, guys. See you on the next one.